So it's been a while since we have heard anything regarding regulators and loot boxes, since we have gotten an update in regards to how certain countries are going about ensuring that game companies don't run rampant with loot boxes, which are essentially gambling implanted into video games. Now, we have heard in the past how Netherlands and Belgium really cracked down on loot boxes in their respective countries, but another country that's really taken a lot of action as of late is the UK. They did a bunch of research and released a number of reports, and now the latest update on that front from the UK comes from the National Health Service. On their official website, they released the following report in which they echoed a lot of the sentiments provided by other UK government bodies, suggesting that loot boxes are very much gambling and that they need to be regulated as such. The headline of this NHS article reads, "Country's top mental health nurse warns video games pushing young people into under-the-radar gambling." And then this segment reads, NHS Mental Health Director Claire Murdoch has today called on gaming companies to crack down on gambling addiction risks by banning loot boxes from their products. Damn. Miss Murdoch has warned video game firms that they risk setting kids up for addiction by building gambling tasks into their games. This is the same conclusion that a lot of other researchers came to. In response to growing concerns about addiction to gaming, the NHS has confirmed the opening of a new treatment center, alongside up to 14 new NHS gambling clinics nationwide to address significant mental ill health linked to addiction. That's the reaction that they have to gambling becoming a bigger part of gaming. They have opened up a bunch of new clinics. So if they deem this kind of action necessary, then the kind of addiction that loot boxes can cause must be pretty tangible, pretty bad. The investment is part of the NHS long-term plan to improve mental health, backed by at least £2.3 billion extra funding within the next 5 years, helping hundreds of thousands more children and adults to get timely expert care. I'm glad that they included adults here because the conversation has revolved a lot around children, but keep in mind that a lot of adults playing video games cannot help themselves either. They get trapped by loot boxes as well. Next up, we have a quote from Claire Murdoch herself, who said, "Frankly, no company should be setting kids up for addiction by teaching them to gamble on the content of these loot boxes. No firm should sell to children loot box games with this element of chance. So yes, those sales should end, or at the very least, they should have to undergo the same process as gambling activities do. They should get the proper approvals. They should provide the proper warnings and labels in the game box and within the game itself. The ratings board should do their jobs and rate games with loot boxes appropriately, for adults. But until those proper systems are in place, loot boxes should not be sold because they're currently incredibly predatory and they're being sold to just about anyone." Murdoch continued, "Young people's health is at stake, and although the NHS is stepping up with these new innovative services available to families through our long-term plan, we cannot do this alone, so other parts of society must do what they can to limit risks and safeguard children's well-being." In other words, this cannot just be a UK thing, it's something that has to be worldwide, and I couldn't agree more. I said before that Belgium and Netherlands already took steps. South Korea, they have expressed their concerns over loot boxes. The US recently introduced an anti-loot box bill that gained bipartisan support that apparently has the games industry worried. So there is some headway being made, and we'll see how much that develops throughout 2020. This article then proceeds by highlighting some interesting facts regarding loot boxes, recent findings and such. So this paragraph reads, "Concerns have been raised about children playing video games which involve spending significant amounts of money, often without parents' knowledge or consent, on so-called loot boxes, which are virtual collections of in-game purchases and other add-ons." So without parents' knowledge is particularly worth highlighting because a lot of parents don't know that these video games contain what are called loot boxes that are basically like gambling, and ratings boards don't help either because games rated E for everyone like FIFA and NBA 2K, which clearly have elements of gambling through loot boxes and through imagery of gambling like roulette and slot machines, all of these are being deemed to be kids-friendly, which is obviously ridiculous. All ratings boards like ESRB are doing is adding an in-game purchases label, which is incredibly nebulous and vague and encompasses a wide spectrum of monetization styles. Doesn't really warn people about gambling-like elements, so parents in particular, when they buy FIFA for their kids, they don't know that they're actually purchasing for them a casino with a soccer game on the side. The article continues: to progress in the game, players can collect extra items and content, but do not know what items they will be given until they've paid, which encourages users to keep spending and playing. So this is specifically referring to pay-to-win loot boxes. Mobile games in particular are plagued by that. The AAA games are starting to move away from that after the Battlefront 2 backlash, but they still contain cosmetic loot boxes. Even if they don't statistically affect your capabilities, they are a part of your gameplay experience, given that how your character looks is something that emotionally resonates with a lot of people. That's why cosmetics are so popular. And this is especially true in online games where you get to show off to people by, customizing your armor with different color palettes and equipping all these badass equipment. This paragraph then proceeds to talk about certain findings. It reads, investigations have found numerous cases of children spending money without their parents' knowledge, including a 16-year-old paying £2,000 on a basketball game and a 15-year-old losing £1,000 in a shooting game. And to add to that, I should highlight this BBC article that talks about how kids emptied out their parents' bank account when playing FIFA, not only because they were addicted to wanting to get Lionel Messi, which there's a low chance to get. They also didn't know that they were actually spending real money because these loot box systems, they hide behind the currencies, the premium currencies that these kinds of games offer. And that separation between real world money and the gameplay items that you're purchasing via microtransactions or loot boxes means that people have a harder time keeping track of how much they're spending, and for kids in particular, it leads them to believe that they're not actually spending real dollars, they just think they're spending in-game money. And then a second BBC article further highlighted the issue of kids rampantly spending money in games, not knowing what they were really doing. So my son spent £3,160 in this, what's supposed to be an educational game. Basketball game cost our family £2,000. Clash of Clans, our son spent £700. And you can just scroll down here and read through a wide spectrum of experiences and stories. Going back to the NHS article, it says, a report by the Royal Society of Public Health in December found that over half of young people believe that playing a video game could lead to gambling, and that link between gaming and gambling is a negative one. So that report can actually be found right here in the official RSPH website, rsph.org.uk. And here it is, the report on that front, and in big bold letters, it is highlighted that 55% of young people believe that playing a mobile or video game could lead to a young person gambling. 79% of young people believe that buying a loot box could be addictive for a young person. 54% of young people see the relationship between gambling and gaming as a negative one for young people. So this is based on a number of interviews that this organization conducted. And in addition to this, there's this pamphlet right here, 36 pages long, a booklet of sorts that provides extensive details on how the research was conducted and how gaming and gambling are correlated based on recent research. Going back to the NHS article, this next segment highlights calls to action from Ms. Murdoch, who called on gaming companies to ban sales of games with loot boxes that encourage children to gamble, introduce fair and realistic spending limits to prevent people from spending thousands in games, make clear to users what percentage chance they have of obtaining the items they want before they purchase loot boxes, and support parents by increasing their awareness on the risks of in-game spending. When it comes to showing the percentage chance of obtaining certain rewards, that is something that the ESA has committed to, but it's the only thing they have committed to. This alone is not enough to mitigate the loot box issue. It has to be this plus a combination of other factors, other systems in place. And then, the awareness of parents. The ESA touts how they have this website where they talk about how you can set up parental tools and controls, and they call it a day off of that, but that's not enough. Just saying we have a website doesn't mitigate the fact that a lot of parents are still unaware of the existence of loot boxes and their harmful nature, because the games themselves don't warn parents about the fact that a game contains loot boxes, and They don't warn that loot boxes are akin to gambling and they can lead to addiction and mass spending. They don't warn of the dangers. They make them seem like they're these fun and ethical things, surprise mechanics, as EA likes to put them. They're purposely trying to divert attention away from the dangers. Here's some more research that's presented in this article. Latest figures from the Gambling Commission show 55,000 children are classed as having a gambling problem, and the NHS estimates there are around 400,000 people with a serious gambling problem in England. Recent data shows that more than half of UK parents allow their children to play video games intended for people aged 18 or over without supervision or having played the game themselves. Now, do I think that parents also have a responsibility to watch what their children are doing? Absolutely. But that doesn't justify game companies exploiting those people who might not be as attentive or who might not know that much about loot boxes. Both sides have to do their part. Parents have to be vigilant, and game companies have to stop with their scummy ways. The ones ultimately creating this loot box problem are the game companies. The parents have to watch out and keep an eye on their children, but they wouldn't have to do so to the extent that they have to now if it weren't for the companies starting this loot box movement in the first place. The article continues, 86% of parents believed playing games aimed at people aged 18 or over would have no influence on their children, but 62% of parents ended up trying to take games back from their kids after they noticed a problem. The NHS article then proceeds by highlighting how the law sees gambling in relation to loot boxes and such. This paragraph reads, the Gambling Commission does not regulate some loot boxes due to a loophole, meaning it is not classed as gambling. Under current gambling legislation, this is because there's no official way to monetize what is inside of loot boxes. Despite this, third-party websites selling gaming accounts and rare items are commonplace and easy to find on places such as eBay across the internet. Thank you. Sure, on an official capacity, a lot of these games don't allow you to cash out whatever rewards you earned via loot boxes, but there are plenty of websites out there that use the loot box system of these games as a core infrastructure to develop a gambling website, and the game companies are allowing this by implementing loot boxes the way they have. And then the NHS added that one game even launched a virtual casino which lets players invest real money to gamble on games such as blackjack and poker. Players are unable to convert any winnings from the casino back into real money, creating a cycle of gambling, hard cash in a virtual world. So that's important to note. Just because you cannot cash out doesn't necessarily mean something isn't gambling. You're just putting cash and gambling it within the confines of a fictional environment. Keep in mind that with video games, a lot of people, especially with online games, they seek emotional gratification. And when they get the rewards that they want, they are granted that gratification. And a lot of people chase that feeling, and that's how they become addicted. And sometimes that gratification can become more powerful than the drive of getting money. It is so easy to underestimate how much certain people can become invested in video games in virtual worlds, especially in online environments. From there, we have some more calls to action. This reads, the report also called for the gaming industry to face up to responsibilities to protect players from potential harms, an industry levy to support independent research on long-term effects of gaming, serious concern at the lack of an effective system to keep children off age-restricted platforms and games. Long story short, the games industry needs to do more than what they're currently doing. Instead of being negligent, willfully ignorant to what's going on with the loot box debacle, they need to step up and act responsibly instead of just acting in the name of profits, no matter who gets harmed. Last but not least, we have this quote from Dr. Henrietta Bowden Jones, psychiatrist and founder of CNWL's National Problem Gambling Clinic. Here's what she had to say. As the director of the National Center of Gaming Disorders, the first NHS clinic to treat gaming addiction, I'm fully in favor of taking a public health approach and bringing in a regulatory body to oversee the gaming industry products currently causing great concerns to parents and professionals. Loot boxes are only one of several features that will need to be investigated and indeed researched. We need an evidence-based approach to ensure our young people and gamers in general do not continue to be subjected to new and increasingly harmful products without our intervention. So that is important what she said there about how loot boxes are only one of several features that can be harmful to people. Something doesn't have to be strictly loot boxes. It doesn't need to have RNG elements for it to be harmful. There are other forms of microtransactions that do not utilize randomization that can cause equally harmful effects that are equally manipulative and predatory, and those need to be investigated as well and regulated properly. Another expert who contributed to this discussion is Shirley Kramer, CBE, Chief Executive of the Royal Society for Public Health, who echoed Murdoch's statement by saying, and this is transcribed by Eurogamer, "The rise of gambling by stealth in video games, by stealth, that's important, is a threat to the health and well-being of young people, and we commend the NHS for coming out with this bold call. There is no doubt that loot boxes must be regarded as a form of gambling, and indeed our research showed that 3 in 5 young people regard them as such, and yet the world of online gaming remains an unregulated, fast-evolving, and opaque market with little to no safeguards for children. The government must now make good on its manifesto commitment and move without delay to revamp the outdated 2005 Gambling Act so that it reflects the challenges of the modern day and protects our young people." The only reason game companies can get away with loot boxes right now is because the law hasn't caught up, and Shirley here is calling on the UK to update the Gambling Act to be relevant to modern day issues. All of this echoes sentiments expressed last year by other organizations within the UK. So back in September 2019, the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee published an 84-page report in which they concluded that loot boxes should be banned when it comes to sales to children. And then in October 2019, the Children's Commissioner also called on the UK government to regulate loot boxes under the Gambling Act, publishing its own research. And you can see right here a number of quotes from teenagers who were interviewed about loot boxes and the video games that contain them. So a FIFA player said it takes a long time to get somewhere, so you just do that, open player packs, referring to how games are purposely designed to be grindy and insufferable, so you can relieve that suffering by just paying for loot boxes that alleviate the ridiculous amount of time it takes to get anywhere through pure gameplay. This FIFA player also said it's like gambling, you could lose your money and not get anyone good or get someone really good. Lee, who was 14, another FIFA player, said, "I never get anything out of it, buying packs, but I still do it." That's what addiction is. You know it's bad for you, but there's just this psychological compulsion to engage in this activity for the hope that one day, that one time, you'll get the reward that you want. Another FIFA player said, "You feel like it's a waste of money, and then you open more," expressing a similar level of psychological helplessness. So the NHS essentially took a look at all of these different conclusions and research that was provided by these various organizations and also echoed the sentiment that loot boxes need to be regulated as if they were gambling. Now, the UK Interactive Entertainment Association, which represents the video game publishing industry in the UK, they have provided their response on this whole situation, and it shouldn't come as any surprise that their response is boilerplate and completely dismissive of the issue at hand. They said the following: "The games industry takes its responsibility to players very seriously and acknowledges that some people are concerned. That is why on the 10th of January, we launched our Get Smart About Play campaign, which is designed to help parents and carers manage play online and in the home. It shows that it is already possible to manage, limit, or turn off spend in games with the help of family controls, providing practical guidance on how to do so at www.askaboutgames.com. They're basically pulling an ESA and just saying, well, we have a website, so that absolves us of any responsibilities to ensure that games are monetized properly and responsibly. Their statement continues, the games industry has already committed to measures to inform players about purchasing choices, including in regards to loot boxes. New platform policies will require optional paid loot boxes in games. Oh, I love how they emphasize optional. To disclose information on the relative rarity or probability of obtaining randomized virtual items by the end of 2020, with many companies doing this voluntarily already. Yeah, there's already a perfect response for that by Ariel Fox Johnson, the Senior Counsel for Policy and Privacy at Common Sense Media. As transcribed by Games Industry right here, was expressed that simply disclosing the existence of in-game transaction to parents isn't enough to protect children from making purchases or engaging in excessive spending. Prices, disclosure odds, and other key details about the nature of of such purchases are almost always located within the game itself rather than on a disclosure label. And especially with mobile games, parents may not always realize that their credit card is directly linked to their account already, such as through Google Play, and can be used by children to make purchases without their authorization. And then Keith S. White, the executive director of the National Council on Problem Gambling, added to this by stating the following: most people don't understand odds and randomness in the most simple dimensions, especially when you're talking about dynamic odds. It's almost impossible for people to figure that out, and you have to look at the people you're disclosing to. If it's a young person or someone who is vulnerable to gambling addiction, they're going to understand that information completely differently than a rational, well-informed, or non-addicted consumer. This is all from back in August 2019 when the FTC hosted a loot box workshop hearing in which both sides got to argue about the nature of loot boxes. Going back to the UKIE statement, they concluded with, the government has committed to conducting a review of the Gambling Act, which loot boxes will form a part of. We look forward to working constructively with them on it. So this entire response is basically them saying, here are some half-assed solutions that we put out there that should absolve us of everything. You guys can stop worrying about loot boxes now. No. Just no. The games industry as a whole worldwide does not want loot boxes regulated due to their lucrative nature, but they're failing miserably, failing to provide any sound reasoning for why they should continue to exist other than it makes companies a lot of money, which is just not a good reason. Many government officials around the world seem to agree, and the latest to join the fray is the NHS with this scathing report against loot boxes, calling for their regulation and expressing their harmful nature with research and sound facts and conclusions. Meanwhile, the ESA and companies like EA, all they've got to say anytime a report like this comes out is, we strongly disagree with what's presented. This is how the ESA responded to that 84-page report from the UK's DCMS back in September 2019, and this is probably how they'll continue to respond because they have no real counter arguments to make against damning reports and research being done against loot boxes. Alright, so with that, I've said all there is to say about this latest NHS report against loot boxes. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on everything stated in this article released by the NHS. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.